nice to know the specifics in terms of financial advantages and procedural advantages that are embedded into the different entity choices. Just to start off with consideration to a small business or a large business, and also their own health.
First of all, thank you to Cecile and to Tim for getting this law passed, because they did a great service to the cooperative community. So I am so grateful.
And you drove how many miles to testify?
An hour from Stockton, so it wasn't that far. I went to testify at one of the final hearings and then they voted. So I'm Gail Francisco, I live in Stockton, and we're trying to form the San Juan Clean Natural Foods Co-op and Health Center. And so we are in the middle of entity formation. Even though we started last year, we've been working with UC Berkeley second-year law practicing students to work on our entity formation, because we wanted to be a nonprofit cooperative and based on Janelle Worsey's suggestion, and we didn't pass the living faith test. So we've got to look at some other options. So, and that's why I'm here too, to find out the real deep details on what this law means for us.
Good afternoon. My name is Courtney Hunter, and I'm with TL2C. It is a new partnership in Southern California where we are beginning to reimagine communities together with what our tagline is. My colleague and I, three of them really, we have higher educational background and all in the area of organizational development and learning in formal structures. Larger structures, but really we recognize for a number of years that our values are more closely aligned with cooperative enterprises. And from a community of color perspective, we did some research and we found out, of course, that African Americans after emancipation had tried to do cooperative enterprises as a way, cooperative communities and societies as a way of emancipating themselves. So we felt that our ideas were firmly rooted in tradition and also contemporary to the school of thought that there are more organizational structures than the ones that the SBA community suggests, and that the cooperative enterprise can help uplift our communities, not only ourselves, but most importantly our communities. So we're here to learn more, and the law passed at a wonderful time for me to learn more and to share with my colleagues.
Hi everyone, my name is Vanessa. I live in Davis. I currently work at an organization called Solar Community Housing Association. We do property management for co-op housing in Davis. And I'm just here to learn more about AB 816 and bring the information back to residents.
My name is Charles Brockman. I work at Briar Patch Co-op, which is a consumer co-op in Grass Valley. And I've worked in consumer co-ops for a long time. And so the idea of working co-ops is I'm just trying to get as much information as possible. So some of this might be a little more technical than I'm ready for, but there you go.
My name is Lee Ruth. My background is with agricultural cooperatives, and I serve on the Center for Co-op Development Board along with Tim. And I'm here to watch him. See what he's got to say.
I'm looking forward to that evaluation.
I'm Paul Fairchild from Paso Robles. In 2002, I met him in Brighton, Oregon, at a worker co-op conference there. Ever since then, I've been talking about worker co-op. It's time for me to shut up and do something. So I'm going to get something going in Paso Robles and move the boundary of the movement southward of their area.
Great.
Yeah, I'm Richard House from San Jose. We have a nonprofit called Human Agenda. We're trying to form two cooperatives right now, a sustainable sanitation cooperative and an immigration legal cooperative. And so I'm here to learn more about entity options.
Hi, Jim.
Hi.
So I'm here for South from Seattle, Washington. So my history over the last 8 years has been in a consumer cooperative. I was like the warrior, because I can see where governance plays a big part in an organization and how it can fail and not have individuals that are well-intended folks, and how consumer cooperatives are really struggling these days. But anyway, we made a big change. We, in 3 months, or actually about 3.5 months, we put it forward to our consumers, and we became a worker cooperative, or excuse me, a solidarity co-op, since I saw you last. So that means that several people had asked me, because I just used the term, so I'll just explain a little bit. We have dual classes, we have 2 classes. So we were, for 38 years, we were a consumer cooperative, and now we are a worker consumer cooperative, so 50-50 basically. Buy-in for the staff, basically we have 13,000 members, whatever that total equity is as it stands right now. The workers, they're not forced to become owners, and many of them have chosen not to, so it's not something that everyone just automatically thinks that someone wants to become a worker owner. But anyway, our buy-in, is based on the rate of what our total equity is that we collect from our members. And we have a period of time in which we go buy-in for that. So that's about the organization. I learned a lot about consumer cooperatives. So this is my second conference. I really want to learn more and more about worker cooperatives, because my plan is to set up a organization that I can help to build the cooperative movement by working with an incubator capacity in terms of startups, especially because now I have all this governance experience and a lot of go-tos, and I just want to be able to share what happens. I'm here to learn.
I just want to mention that, our focus will be on worker co-ops, but the statute actually is great and it's very flexible, allowing for what I would call solidarity cooperatives or hybrid cooperatives, sometimes consumer cooperatives that are run by a worker cooperative collective, and sometimes it's a legal formation where there's kind of board representation. So hopefully we'll talk about that as a possibility as well.
Cool. Yeah. So I'm a student at Davis. I study economics and statistics. Still an undergrad. I also work at the California Center for Cooperative Development. I am accounts payable clerk, so I help put together some of the financial documents, just a little bit. And yeah, I'm passing out evaluations at the end, so just keep in mind any of the stuff that you want to hear or any notes to the speaker at the end.
My name is Mike. I run the Washington Rentals website, which argues against the employment contract in favor of worker co-ops. And I'm here to see how this legislation influences the thinking of people who are starting worker co-ops.
Hi, my name is Roque. I'm working on a startup, Pacific Islanders Alternative Medicine hybrid worker co-op, and I want to find out if the consumer co-op would handle a hybrid, and then how challenging is the financing aspect because of that type of an entity? Do the banks recognize it, etc.? Is it easy to find financing? And 2, legal counsel. How hard would it be to find legal counsel? We're based in LA at this point. How challenging would it be to get legal counsel that could handle that kind of entity?
Hi, my name is Alan. I'm with Co-op Source I work, and we are a software development workers cooperative. And just starting out, getting a local entity.
Great. Where are you based?
In Nevada City.
Okay, great. Wrote down some of the points that weren't necessarily going to be on the slideshow that we can kind of emphasize as we come back. A couple of just general things. It seems like we have either 4 attorneys or a couple other attorneys who have a good sense not to out themselves. So we might get into some technical things. You might have some technical questions, and there might be times I kind of will say, hey, let's get into that at dinner, so that we don't lose everyone else. And it sounds like we have about 3 or 4 established co-ops and a couple starting up, so we'll try to really make it as applicable to you, and that will probably address some of the concerns of other people who just want to know about the law if we focus on a couple of cases. We won't be able, we're not your attorneys necessarily, we might be for particular people in the room, but we won't be able to give you legal counsel about your particular situation, in part because we're doing this in a public format. If you really want legal counsel to do it confidentially with you, so that later on, if the government says, well, what were you advised? Were you advised that was a safe thing to say? You can say, I have lawyer-client privilege. We don't have to tell you what the lawyer said to us. So we're going to be vague about certain areas and say, this in particular is an area you need to get legal counsel about. But in general, we're going to give some general legal principles and information, and part of the workshop purpose is to make sure there's more attorneys who can answer all these questions. But we'll also hopefully come back to some topics about how you find an attorney and how you train your attorney, essentially, because too often attorneys have their way of working with you, and you have to actually train them to understand they're working for you. So we'll come back to that. Did you want to add anything else on intro, or do you want to take it from there? All right, so Sushil's going to take it from there.
All right, great. So I'm assuming all of you have at least attended a law school class that was one of the prerequisites for this workshop. Corporations, business associations.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he's like, yeah, bring it. I'm ready for this. No, this is not a law school class, but I'm going to try and make some of these legal concepts fun and engaging. And I'm going to rely on Mike to do the animations. So should I
Whatever you like.
Okay, so why form a business entity? This is a very interactive room. In fact, I wanted to just note, I really appreciate coming to co-op conferences because it's often the beginning of every workshop is at least 20 minutes of introductions. Have you noticed that? And if sometimes I used to get in my past when I was kind of short-tempered and I would get so annoyed. I'm like, just get to the substance of the workshop. You're wasting so much valuable time on these introductions. But I was just realizing that we're all resources to a movement. And the whole point of the conference is to meet other resources. And I don't meet most of you. Like at lunch, I only met a few of you, and I actually knew everybody at my lunch table. So it's really valuable those first 15, 20 minutes introductions, and I look forward to continuing conversations after. So having said that, why do people form business entities? There was no connection between those two statements. Why do you think people form business entities? Go ahead.
Recognition
Recognition. You want to say anything else about that?
from other businesses, from a state body, from, from the legal system.
So being recognized
institutions.
Yep, by other institutions, by the market, being formalized and having a thing separate from yourself that people are recognizing.
Protection for personal liability.
Right, so part of the recognition and separating out the activities that you're doing as a business from yourself, you're insulating yourself from personal liability, and the liability is contained in this other entity.
There are rights and obligations that attach to your business entities.
Right, so business entities have rights, they can sue, they can be sued, they have religious freedom rights now apparently, First Amendment, they have tons of rights that they shouldn't have. What's that?
Corporate constitutional rights.
They have a little bit too many rights right now, but they do get rights granted to them when they're formed.
They also have economic power that participate in economic markets.
Yeah, they have a lot of economic power. And in fact, I would guess that the majority sentiment at this conference is that corporations have too much economic power. And that's really funny because today we're talking a lot about corporations. Go to the next one. So, you can just do all three of these. So the reason why, generally, what you've all said is people do form business entities to limit their liability when they're doing business activities. And a business entity, whether it's a corporation or a limited liability company, allows you to protect your personal assets. It also allows you to protect the assets of a group of people who will come together and do an activity. Can you just go back to it allows you to pool resources with a lot of people and have a way to measure your ownership stakes in that entity, whether it's through share issuances or through percentage ownership if it's a company. And finally, entities allow you to delay taxes being assessed on your personal tax return and allow the entity to be taxed instead. So there's a lot of tax considerations with forming entities. The types of legal entities that we generally deal with, and you've probably heard of, are general corporations, cooperative corporations, limited liability companies, which we're going to refer to as LLCs throughout this talk, worker co-ops, which when I put that up there, I'm specifically referring today to the new worker co-op corporation in California. And then nonprofit organizations, including public benefit nonprofits, which many of you are aware of because those are the ones that are the tax exempt 501c3s. But there's other types of nonprofits, including mutual benefits, which aren't 501c3s, but for example, condominium associations or different types of associations of business leads, people who come together and their entity is not taxed, and the entity does things on behalf of its members. So there's a bunch of different entities. Today we're going to focus on the corporation and the limited liability company. So the reason why we're going to focus on these two entities is because they're basically kind of two poles of entity choice for worker co-ops. The LLC allows for a lot of flexibility, and the co-op corporation allows for a kind of a more strict defined structure that's more well recognized and is able to protect cooperative principles.
Well,
Yeah, but
before you continue, what about an S corp? How does that fit into this?
okay, so the on top of these two, the limited liability companies and cooperative corporations are entities. So let me, I'll get to the S corp question. You form an entity at the state level. So in the state, usually in the state in which you're going to be operating, you form your entity, and the state grants your entity existence. A lot of entities aren't formed in the state in which they're operating. A lot of entities are actually formed in Delaware because it's the most favorable state for investors, and it's actually the most efficient for investors to use that forum to get disputes resolved. So most of the publicly traded companies are actually formed in Delaware, and they operate nationally. But for co-ops, usually they're formed in the state because they do the majority of their operations. So for California, we're really going to be talking about California entities, California Co-op Corporation, and California Limited Liability Companies. There are limited liability companies statutes in every state, actually. And most states also have a cooperative corporation statute, and they might have several co-op related entities. There might be an ag co-op, a consumer co-op, and a worker co-op. Then there's tax recognition. Tax recognition starts at the federal level and it's usually followed at the state level. So general corporations are taxed as C corporations, which means that the entity, the corporation is taxed, it's a taxable person, and its shareholders are also taxed, the owners. S corporations are a type of tax status at the federal level in which the entity generally does not pay tax because all of the profits and losses flow through the entity and are taxed at the shareholder level. Then there's a third type of corporate tax, which is T, and that is what largely where co-ops are taxed. We'll talk about T in a second. There's really no point to this slide. I just wanted to corporation and GM is an example of a corporation. So how do you form a corporation? Here's a list of things you need to do to form a corporation. I think all of these slides are available actually on the Dropbox. And there's more materials available. It's sustainable. The Dropbox for the conference. Our handy volunteer will let us know about that.
Yeah, we have it. We have a Dropbox that's accessible with all the content, handouts, and then also PowerPoint slides. So you can talk to us after, and we'll link you with that information.
And if you want more information on worker co-ops in California, the Sustainable Economies Law Center has a whole manual called Think Outside the Box, which is really helpful, much more thorough than this presentation. But so how do you form a cooperative corporation, there's a list of steps you need to take. You file articles of incorporation. That is the document that you give to the state. When the state files it, then your corporation has come into being. Then you prepare bylaws and membership documents. The bylaws and membership documents are internal documents. You don't file the bylaws with the state, but the bylaws are basically the governing document for the corporation. They talk about how you become a member. They talk about how the board's elected, what rights do members have, and how do profits and losses flow through the organization. Those are all usually covered in the bylaws. There's other things that are covered in the bylaws too. You draft a membership documents, which are actually like shareholder certificates in a normal corporation, in a cooperative corporation. That is the document that shows your ownership stake and gives you more information about your rights as an individual member of this larger corporation. You hold the first board meeting. You adopt the bylaws, you issue the memberships, the co-ops, and then you do other things that every business traditionally does, like open a bank account, get a business license and permits, get an accountant and bookkeeper, maintain your membership records, and maintain your corporate records in general. So for cooperative corporations in California, similar to all corporations, they have boards of directors. They have officers, and then they have to have an annual member meeting, and they have to have elections for the board of directors. I'm telling you all of this because I'm trying to give some substance or structure to this otherwise vague concept of a cooperative. The point of this is that in California, a cooperative is actually a corporation, like other corporations. Instead of just having shareholders, it has members. Those members vote for the board of directors. That vote takes place on a one-member, one-vote basis as required by law. And so the great thing about the co-op law in California is that it protects certain cooperative principles in the law, such as one-member, one-vote basis for electing the board of directors. But other than that, there's still a lot of flexibility with this co-op law. You can have, here are two different types of worker co-ops in California. One is Rainbow Grocery. It's a larger worker co-op. It has a board, which is actually a separate group or a subset of its larger membership. And the larger membership are the workers. So if we just take a quick second and pause here before I go to cheese board, I would like to ask the audience, what is the difference between a worker co-op and a consumer co-op? We have a volunteer. Thank you.
A worker co-op, a consumer co-op is serving basically the needs of consumption, whereas a worker co-op is a sort of producer co-op of labor.
Okay, that's great. It's a producer co-op of labor. And let's say Rainbow Grocery was a consumer co-op. Well, who would be the board and who would be the members there? Because Rainbow Grocery is actually a worker co-op, but it's a grocery store.
That would be the members,
right?
People that make the executive decisions about the organization to be the board.
Yeah, they're usually a subset of the members. But the reason I even stopped is because a lot of the consumer co-ops we know of are grocery stores. They're natural food stores, and a lot of people don't realize that what makes that a consumer co-op is that you have a right as a member, as a consumer, to be a member there. But Rainbow is not like that. Rainbow is actually really different. When you shop at Rainbow, you can't become a member of Rainbow. It's limited to the workers there. So the other one is Cheese Board. Cheese Board is a collective in which all the members, all the worker members, are on the board of directors. So you have two hats as a member, a worker member of Cheese Board. You're also on the board of directors and have fiduciary duties as a board member.
Does the new law define a collective?
It does, and Tim is going to cover that.
Okay.
So you can evaluate him.
All right.
And then there's another thing to note is that worker co-ops can have a third category of stakeholder, which is the employees who aren't yet members. And they're this green thing. So both Trees Board can have non-member employees, and Rainbow can have this non-member employees. And usually, they're called candidates, and they're on the path to worker membership, to ownership in the co-op. Co-ops have officers, president, secretary, treasurer. They don't necessarily have any more power. They could, that's up to the co-op. But the state requires that you have officers because you're a corporation. Some other things to know about corporations in general, which applies to co-ops, is that they're a separate taxpayer. They file their own taxes as a person. And they have to observe corporate formalities in order to maintain limited liabilities. Corporate formalities includes you have a separate bank account for the corporation, you enter into contracts and agreements, and you get permits as a corporation. You don't do it just as individuals, not trying to bind the corporation. These are important because these formalities are what protect the corporate form and protect the members from being personally liable for debts or obligations of the corporation. And included in that is maintaining records and minutes of your meetings. Yeah.
Are the operation agreements, is that part of filing and articles of the corporation?
Yeah, the operating agreement is going to be what I cover in the next section on limited liability company. So one of the advantages in California of forming a co-op corporation is that you can use the word co-op in your name. And if that's important to your business model, your identity, you should form a cooperative corporation. Co-op corporate taxation can be more stable to administer than partnership taxation, which will make sense when I get to the next slide about LLCs. There's a specific securities law exemption for co-op memberships, which allows you to get voting memberships in your worker co-op and allow up to $1,000 investment per member without having to register or get another exemption from securities law requirements. If you're interested in this whole concept of securities law and capital raising, you should come to the next session, which is all about that subject.
Seems to first.
The minimum franchise tax is waived in the first year. The minimum is $800 for limited liability entities, but it's waived in the first year for corporations. The limited liability company. There's another one on the slide, but just So how do you form it? It's very similar to how you form a corporation. Instead of filing articles of incorporation, you're not actually incorporating. It's a company. You organize it. And so you have a different document you have to file to form it, which is articles of organization. It's not a limited liability corporation. That's often what people get confused. It's a company. And the reason for that is really important because of the tax status. So when you form an articles of organization for a limited liability company, you have to indicate whether it's member managed or manager managed. That's a really important thing for worker co-ops. A lot of worker co-ops want to have all of the worker members in this company be managers. And there's certain other benefits that they might be able to get from that with regard to employment characterization and securities law. So keep that in mind as we go through this, and I'll bring it up again. So why are LLCs so popular? They're really popular because they allow a lot of flexibility for worker co-ops with regard to tax and employment. But they're still very similar to corporations because just like a corporation, an LLC is a limited liability entity. It's a separate person from its members. But it's not necessarily a separate taxpayer because most LLCs are taxed as general partnerships by default. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so let's talk about employment flexibility and then I'll talk more about tax. So if you are a member of an LLC, you are not necessarily employed by your LLC. But if you are a worker member of a corporation, cooperative corporation in California, there has been up to this point a presumption that a corporation's laborers are employed. So by that, let me put that another way. When you have a corporation and you have people who provide labor to the corporation, there's been a presumption in California that those people who provide the labor are employees, and they have the rights of employees, and the corporation has to follow employment laws. But with LLCs, because LLCs come from a totally different area of law, they come out of general partnerships, versus cooperatives come out of corporations. Because they come out of a totally different area of law, that same assumption does not apply automatically. Rather, the assumption is that the members of the LLC are partners. They can be employees also, and they can choose to behave like employees. They can pay themselves as employees, which would be issuing W-2s and having wages. Or they can choose to pay themselves as partners, which would be getting draws on partnership income or guaranteed payments. So there's different ways of paying partners versus employees. But the important part of it, and the reason why I'm talking about this, is the LLC offers you more flexibility if your worker co-op does not want to employ its members. For example, if you can't be employed in the United States, if you don't have employment authorization, you want to form an entity that has members who don't have employment authorization, you can form an LLC and make a plausible argument that these people are all owners and members. Another reason would be if you don't have enough capital to pay yourselves for all the time that your members are putting in, to really account for all that time and be able to comply with employment laws with regard to minimum wage and overtime payments. And you don't want, your vision for this business wasn't formal employment. It was something different. So that's possible under the LLC, but there's a caveat there, which is that it's risky, it can be risky. It can be risky if the relationships break down, if one of the former members goes and brings a labor claim with the state labor agencies saying, I was mistreated, I was misclassified, I was an employee, but they never paid me as an employee, I owed all of this overtime and back pay. So there's a risk there to your entity. One way to mitigate the risk is to have a highly democratic structure, and that goes into the operating agreement. So the operating agreement, which you raised earlier, is the document that governs the LLC internally, versus the bylaws govern the corporation. So that operating agreement should be highly democratic if you want to avoid, or if you want to mitigate the risk that you could be misclassifying your members. This is a really complicated area of law, so I'm just trying to summarize it, but I'm just saying it's possible.
But if they behave as partners, does workers' comp law apply?
If they're true partners, they don't have the obligation of workers' comp because they're not.
What about a work co-op?
In the workers' co-op, actually I'm gonna punt that one to Tim as well. So Tim is gonna take the workers' comp question. So we'll come back to workers' comp and workers' comp. Because I'm punting so many things here, I really need to get to it quickly.
I was just going to mention that we're doing a whole workshop tomorrow on worker co-ops as LLCs.
Oh, great.
So we'll be going into a lot more of these.
Good, thank you, thank God. One more thing about the end of that slide was that as partners, you get a schedule K1. Instead of getting a wage statement or W-2, you get K1, which shows you your share of income, deductions, and credits from the partnership. But an LLC can also be taxed as a partnership, as a corporation. You have to elect that. You file a form with the IRS that tells the IRS that your LLC wants to be taxed as a corporation. And if you get taxed as a corporation, then you can be taxed as a cooperative corporation. So you can be an LLC taxed under subchapter T. I hope there's a subchapter T slide. So some advantages of LLCs over corporations is that managing members of LLCs, there's a securities exemption that applies to them, which means that you don't need to qualify or find another exemption for their investments into their own LLC. They can be partners. There's no required board of directors, whereas you have a required board of directors for a cooperative corporation. And there's no required member meetings or minutes of these meetings to protect your corporate formalities. But you do have those requirements to protect corporate formalities under cooperative corporation. This is not a best practice. You should have member meetings and minutes of your meetings even if you're under an LLC. Okay, so that was the end of my section, but I think that there's one more thing that you need to understand, which is subchapter T. It's a whole area of tax law that applies to co-ops. It's essentially applying pass-through rules that you found for LLCs and corporate tax rules and blending them together, and allows a co-op to take advantage of both systems. It allows a co-op to retain some earnings at the corporate level, which it pays a corporate tax on, and it also allows it to pass through some earnings to its members and not pay corporate tax on those earnings. And that pass-through is justified if this corporation is operating on a cooperative basis, which is defined in the tax rules.
And you said as an LLC, you can elect with Form 8832 to be taxed under subchapter T?
Yeah, you can be taxed as a corporation and then file as a subchapter T corporation. File your tax return. Thank you.
Thanks again, Mike. So, the old law, up till this year, was called the California Consumer Cooperatives Law. And it was a great law, but imperfect. And I'm grateful to the consumer cooperatives and the agricultural cooperatives got the law passed at all. But the reason it was called the California Consumer Cooperative Law was the California consumer cooperatives were in the 80s the ones that had political power to get something passed. And that's why they got their name on it. And then in fine print it said other kinds of cooperatives could use this. And we were worker co-ops, where we tended to be one of those kinds. But it became kind of a misnomer. It was very confusing for the California government, because we would say we were a worker co-op, and they would say, well, certainly it looks like you're a consumer cooperative because you formed under a statute called consumer cooperative. So that was a problem, and the fact that all the rules were really written for consumer cooperatives in mind. So Davis Food Co-op would be a good example, where they have, they have a employee staff, but then they have maybe 5,000 members spread out through a large area. So the law would say you have to have 10 days notice for a membership meeting, because they thought it would take 10 days for those 5,000 people to get around. Well, I work with bakery cooperatives where people see each other all the time. It's ridiculous for us to have a rule saying we can't have a membership vote except for 10 days notice from now. So we're trying to, the law was great, but it was really written with larger cooperatives in mind that had a separate board from the membership. And if you have a smaller co-op, you might not want to have that division. So we were able to write things in that made more sense for smaller worker co-ops. For a co-op the size of Rainbow or Alvarado Street, actually those divisions become natural after a period of time. They don't become as uncomfortable, but there's still advantages to the law. And then there was a securities exemption built in. And a securities exemption, we talked a little bit about it, but it basically means if you don't have a securities exemption and someone wants to buy stock in your company, you usually have to hire a lawyer and some accountants to write up a lot of pages of paper. Actually, sometimes it costs $250,000 to have all this stuff written up and go to the Securities Commission. Well, the businesses were starting We don't want to spend our money on that. We don't probably have that money to begin with. So what you want is an exemption saying you can go right to people and offer them a certain amount of security. When the consumer cooperatives passed it, they thought $300 was great because if you get $300 from those 5,000 consumers, you got a lot of money. For a worker co-op, if your workers only put in $300, you're not going to be able to start much of a business. So for us, we wanted there to be a bigger exemption. When we talked to the other sectors, they also thought $300 is out of date. That was back in the 80s. So we were able to increase that amount to $1,000 for every member of any kind of co-op. But for worker co-ops, that's still not enough, and we'll talk about that hopefully if we get time for the securities exemption. So we have a new law as of January 1st. What kind of fun can we have with this new law? That's mostly what you probably want to know, right? One thing is, don't you know who I am? They didn't before. They didn't know what a worker co-op was. You go to the state all the time, and they would send you forms for consumer cooperatives. Literally, the form you get at the end of the year says, "Hey, consumer cooperative, tell us who your officers are," et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of my people would just throw those away. We're not a consumer cooperative. It says consumer property. We're nonprofit. We're not that. They throw it away. So it's actually, now you can say you're a worker cooperative, or you can say you're an employment cooperative. We actually built an alternative name into the statute. This may have an advantage for your bank. If I was going to a bank and they weren't a very hip bank, which most banks aren't, I'd probably describe myself as an employment cooperative rather than a worker cooperative, because my experience with banks is you say worker cooperative and red flags with sickles and hammers are waving in their mind. To the degree that you can now go, there's a corporate statute passed by California and has this, this term in it, that really comforts banks. And especially since you can point to this statute that goes back beyond the 80s, and say, because most of them know the worker cooperative, you could say if there's a statute that starts at 1220 in the corporations code, that's how we're founded, that goes, oh yeah, okay, there's something the government recognizes, so that should be very helpful. But there was an alternative reason that we also put that term in for employment law, because it gave us a reason to say something about employment law and corporate statute, which is most of us were worried about this question of if you're a cooperative corporation, are your people employees or are they non-employees? So for overtime in California, you have to pay overtime anything over 8 hours. In our collectives, that's very counterproductive. That doesn't make any sense. They made that law to keep bosses from exploiting workers and making them work more hours. They figured if you pay them more for working after 8 hours, then the bosses will not want them to work. In our case, we actually schedule ourselves quite often. So paying more actually encourages us to work more and get injured. So it doesn't make sense in our context. So we want to be able to argue that we're not employees in that context. There's actually a very strong argument, but we've been successful at staying out of courts. That's great, but that means there's never been a decision from the courts about that, so we put something in the statute that would help with that. The other thing is a lot of our businesses, we might be smaller, at least at the beginning, and we want to operate as collectives. And the collective just means that you don't really have a division between your board and your membership. They're often the same thing. And a lot of us were operating that way. As soon as we would make someone a member, we'd also make them on the board of directors. And I work with some co-ops where there's 55 members and they're all on the board of directors. That's very efficient in some ways, but it was very inefficient because the government still assumed that there was a separate board of directors. And there were certain votes that you had to hold as members and certain as directors, and you had to have 10 days notice. So we'd all be sitting in the same room. Someone would come with a good idea, put it on the, maybe they put it on the agenda even 2 days earlier, and we all say, yeah, we're in favor of that, but we can't vote on it today because we have to have 10 days notice, so we're going to have to put this good idea out for 10 days. We're able to get around that now. Lee?
Oh, I was just wondering if the collective is now defined in the law.
It is. It's not defined as much as we would like it to be. This is one of those areas where we're almost kind of amazed. It took us 5 years to get a law passed. And sometimes you get something passed and then you come back with what's called a cleanup bill later on. And after you're able to get them to recognize the first thing and say, okay, now that you recognize that, we want to add these other things on top of it. So we got the term collective board worker cooperative defined in the law. And one particular advantage defined, but we'll need to go back later on and define some more advantages. But what I will talk about with you is if you really want to operate collectively, here's some language you can use or go to your attorney and educate them about this option so they can get creative about it. Raising money. So she'll talk a little bit more about that, but the exemption applies to anyone who's a member in your worker co-op, and we define members including community investors. So people who want to put money into your co-op. So in some ways, it's become a new form of capital raising and crowdfunding that could work for worker co-ops. There's going to be a whole workshop on that, but maybe we'll get a little chance to talk about that later on. Another thing is to reward job creation. Some cooperatives, they stay out small and they want to stay small. That's fine. That's what's worked for their culture. But if you want to grow, you actually should structure the financial incentives to your co-op to reward growth. And the conventional structures actually punish people for creating new jobs. You'd actually be better off just staying smaller and keeping all the money for yourself and create other jobs and dilute the ownership in a conventional business. So we've created some things in the statute that actually will allow you, if what you want to do is grow, is reward people for creating new jobs. And another thing is to stop co-ops from becoming what's called demutualized, becoming conventional corporations, or to, if they're going to do that, to take some of the resources that they built up as a cooperative and dedicate them to another cooperative or cooperative development fund. So, yeah.
Yeah, with respect to employment law, under this new entity, people put in bank time, in other words, like comp time, would be legal under this law, correct? They wouldn't have to be.
That comes down to the question of whether you're employees or not. And if you're employees, you can't volunteer time or have unpaid time. And if you're documented, it becomes dangerous. So, but if you make the argument that you're not employees, then that gives you some freedom to do that. So one more, please. So I'm going to just confess, although my job to talk about the fun things you could do, my slides are not going to be fun at all. The slides have all the details for the statutes for the attorneys. If they want to look up the exact wording, it's also in there. And if you go to an attorney who doesn't understand co-ops, you'll be able to say, that's the section to start looking at. But the fun stuff is actually about this in bold here. So it says you can call yourself a worker cooperative, employment cooperative, and then we put this language in here that says election to be organized as a worker cooperative or employment cooperative does not create a presumption that workers are employees of the corporation for any purpose. So, judges, they see a corporation, they see people working for it, they assume that they are employees. We put something in the statute that says you can call yourself an employment cooperative, but that shouldn't give any sense that you're employees. The assumption before was that you were. This kind of snuck language in that says, judges, you shouldn't assume that, and they have to listen to the legislature. So, that actually creates some comfort that we didn't have before about if we ever get into court. Now we have some way to say, no, you should assume that. It should be based on whether we're treated as employees by bosses. And if we don't have bosses, that shouldn't hold. So, a definition of a worker cooperative is one which includes a worker cooperatives who are natural persons. That doesn't mean hippies. Natural persons mean real human beings, whereas not corporations, because you could have cooperatives formed of other corporations. And whose patronage consists of labor. Probably is pretty obvious to you. But so I want to point out that you can actually have what's a hybrid cooperative even under the statute. You can have one class of worker members and maybe another one of consumers or farmers that are suppliers for you. But to be a worker co-op, specifically call yourselves that, at least 51% of the workers must be worker members or candidates. And we defined in the law the word candidate, which had never been defined before. Some people use the term probationary members. That I actually think has some real legal problems. Much better to use the term candidate. And so we define that in the law. There's a hand up over here. Yeah.
Yeah, so to clarify, you just need to have, in order to qualify as a worker co-op, you have to have 51% of your worker members who are of your, well, 50% of the workers have to be worker members or candidates. And you can have other classes that may include not natural persons.
Correct.
Or other things.
Right. So, for instance, I work with the Arizona Association of Cooperatives, and when we start out the cooperatives, we actually have a lot of the money put in is actually from the association. So we have one class for them, and then we have a class for the natural persons who are actually the members of the board and run the business. Sure. Next slide, please. So we defined different things in the statute, what a worker member is, because again, there was no definition of worker cooperative before, so we had to put a definition in for that, and what a candidate is. And I have to say this is one of the areas where I think we're going to need to go back and add details later on, but we at least got it in there. Because it's open to, I think, abuse. Because what we say is there's a worker and a candidate is someone who's on track to becoming a member worker. Well, you could say someone's a candidate, but it's going to take them 50 years to become a member, or they're going to have a buy-in of $1 million. So that would be very easy for you to have 3 people who are the real owners and make a bunch of fake candidates, basically make every employee. So that's something where hopefully we'll see some abuses, we're likely to see some abuses at some point, then we'll be able to go back to legislature and say, here's a case why we need to put more definitions into this. So we got it passed and that was improved. So about job creation, most of the time you divide up your money in a worker co-op based on how many hours were worked or how many wages were earned. And this makes it so there's not much incentive to create new jobs. If you're in an industry where scale is really important, like it is for yours, a big industry, then maybe you make more money. But if in my kind of bakery, if we have one bakery and we create another bakery, that bakery, the second bakery, is probably not going to make as much money. It's actually going to drag down the patronage. So it's actually a disincentive to create new costs. You invest a lot of money and they don't actually make as much money for you even when they succeed. So what if you want to create new jobs, what you should say is we're going to reward people for creating new jobs. So if you're a founder and I get hired on later on, it shouldn't be that my hour is equal to your hour because you actually create the ability for me to have a job that creates community wealth. So you don't have to, but this allows the option in the court for co-ops for you to get credit for the fact that you're creating jobs, at least get paid back for that investment and equalized out. So if you're interested in that, that gets into a lot of detail. This is something you would want to work out with an attorney because we haven't gotten through a court yet, but certainly California will allow it because they say we can set that. The other thing is we've always been worried about hybrid cooperatives, that they would say, well, there's 10,000 consumer members and there's only 30 workers. So if you divide up the patronage, the surplus at the end of the year, you should give it mostly to the consumer cooperative members. Now the fact is, consumer cooperative members usually don't even care about patronage because for them it's like $10 each. It's not even worth doing the paperwork. A lot of consumer cooperatives don't even bother with patronage. So we were always worried that they were going to do that. So we got it passed in the statute that says if there is a worker co-op, no matter if you have other classes, all the patronage is going to go to workers, which actually benefits the consumers anyway, because retained workers and all these other things is actually what's going to help the consumers. So that was an advantage. Next slide, please. So how do you form it? Especially if you already are one. You don't have to go through new paperwork. You don't have to start a whole new corporation. You have articles of incorporation. You just go file an amendment. You send off something with your new bylaw, your new articles, check for $30, and because there's this new law, they'll probably just rubber stamp it. As long as you have an attorney to look at it who knows what they're doing. And then you need to modify your bylaws to take advantage of any of these new rules if you want to. You don't have to change your bylaws, you don't have to change anything. You can operate under the old statute still, it still applies to everyone. But if you want to take advantage of these things, what you want to do is change your articles to say, we're an employment cooperative or worker cooperative, use both terms, and then change the bylaws to affect that. So, collective board. So, the language, and I was surprised that the legislature even let us put the term collective into a statute, so that was fantastic. But when the wording says that the collective board worker cooperative means a worker cooperative in which there is only one class of member consisting of worker members, all of who are members on the board. So that is to say, it's not a hybrid cooperative, and everyone who's made a member is on the board of directors. If you had a hybrid cooperative, if you had any members who weren't on the board and who weren't natural persons workers, you could still have under this existing statute, but you couldn't call it a worker collective board. The idea is we wanted to create a board where all the decisions were made by the board of directors. We didn't have to fake that we were having board member meetings every once in a while, like an annual meeting. I was required to have an annual meeting of the members. And it was silly for some of our co-ops where we meet every 2 weeks or something like that. We would just have to designate one meeting. Oh, this is the annual meeting. Yay, it's over. So we wanted to get beyond those fictions. So we wrote one benefit in, which is to say you don't have to have an annual meeting of the members anymore if you're a collective board. You don't have to go through that fiction. There are still some problems that the statute was written with a couple things that they always assumed the members were going to vote on. One was electing new directors. They didn't want to have the directors of this consumer cooperative elect new directors. That's called a self-perpetuating board. It's a junta. That's not what you want. But for our collectives, as soon as you elect someone a member, you also want to elect them as a director. We don't want to have a fake membership meeting just to do that. The same thing about the bylaws. They say anytime you change the bylaws to affect the property rights and the voting rights of the members have to vote on that. They didn't want the board of directors taking away rights from the members. Well, that makes no sense when everyone's also already on the board of directors. So we'll probably go back with a cleanup bill that makes it absolutely clear that the board of directors is the ones who can change the bylaws, and they can also elect new directors. Right now, there's kind of a way you could work around it, which is this language about delegates that's stuck in the statute. Next slide, please. So this again is for mostly the lawyers, but this is a statute. If you want, or if you have an attorney you're trying to work with, point towards the statute and say, try to be creative in how you use that to get it to do what we want. Which is basically there's this weird thing put in the statute that says the members can create delegates and give them any or all of the powers of the members. And you can make any reasonable rules about the meeting. So you could create, actually all the members, we elect ourselves all as delegates, and we're going to have meetings on 48 hours notice instead of 10 days notice. You can do anything you want, actually. Now, I wouldn't have done that before this new law, but the new law actually establishes that there is an intention to create a collective. So if you got created like that because you already, were saying we're a worker cooperative statute, I think that would fly. This is definitely one of those areas where you want creative counsel and you want legal counsel to make sure it works for you. But I do think it's possible to use that to operate as basically a collective now, not have separate board meetings and member meetings. Well, we already actually talked a little bit about that, and I think let's just kind of quickly. All right, let's go to the next one. We wanted to do something like they have in Europe. A lot of the European cooperatives, they create they have their individual accounts for their workers, but they also have a collective account because they assume that the cooperative is not just about benefiting the current members, it's meant to be a community institution that goes on. And so there was always a question under U.S. law whether you could even have such a, 5 minutes, thanks, whether you could even have such an account. And we created something in California law that says, yes, you definitely can have that, as long as what you're doing is distributing to the members whatever the members earn, but if you want to put something aside as a reserve account, you can do that. And that's the money that if you sold out at the end, or decided to become a conventional business, that's the money that would have to go to some other development organization or some other co-op. You couldn't take that money and just distribute it among the workers. And that can happen. I work with grocery stores and stuff like that. And, it's not uncommon for consumer cooperatives or even worker cooperatives for Whole Foods when they come to town to make the offer to the members a certain amount of money. And that they'll sell out because they know if they don't sell out, Whole Foods is just going to run them over anyway. What this says is even if they sold out, they can't take the money that all the members and everyone else built up all those years and distribute it among themselves just because they happen to be there. They'd have to distribute that out to the former members, and anything that was in the collective account of the individual would go to some other cooperative. They weren't going to be able to take that divvy up among themselves. I think considering the time, I'm going to just try to... 2:45. 2:45?
Yeah, 2:45.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we're out of time to talk. Well, let's maybe see if there's one more slide that seems essential.
You have a question?
I did.
Oh, sure.
When it says it's like non-patronage source income, could you clarify that?
Sure. So we still do have the terminology patronage, which is really written with agricultural and consumer cooperatives in mind. So if I'm a member of a consumer cooperative, I go in and I buy things at a certain price. If there's money up at the end of the year, it's because the patrons gave too much money and it's refunded at the end of the year. And that's where this tax term patronage refund comes from. It doesn't work so well for us, and that's why we had to define that a patron in a worker co-op is someone who provides labor. But it is true that in a worker co-op, sometimes you have some of the money is being created by members, and some of it is non-members. So a really simple case in a bakery, we have people who are candidates, we consider them employees, we don't consider them members, and by cooperative principles, we don't take the money that they generated and distribute it among ourselves. So that's one of the reasons you could build up an individual reserve, is that we don't distribute the money out to them, so we build it up as a reserve for keeping the co-op going. So that's something you want to work out with a tax attorney or a worker, someone who really knows worker co-op law, what's really patronage and what's profit is actually being generated by the non-members and you have to pay taxes on. One of the things that this law made clear is something that a lot of worker cooperatives have been doing in the last decade or so, which is taking money they could have distributed to themselves as workers, as members, and not pay any taxes, and putting it aside for the business because they thought that was better for the business and the community. There were people, attorneys included, who would have said to you before, you can't do that, you have to distribute 100%. Which was a really dangerous way to run your business because January 2nd comes around and you don't have any money left over. So what it says under this law is you can put it aside, but if that was generated by members and you're closed down the business, you have to go back to those former members and distribute the money then. But you can save it now, you just have to pay taxes on it as though it was profit. Which many businesses will choose to do that because that's better for the co-op law. I think maybe there's one more slide. Any other questions?
One before that.
Well, yeah, these are some of the guards against demutualization, and mostly, we talked about it a little bit. If people are more interested now, we can talk more about that. And so we created a definition of community investor. Now, this was seen as a bad, radical thing by some people in the worker co-op community because they said, you're creating people who are not members of the worker co-op and you're making them members. And my answer to that was, they were members all the time. Under the current statute, you can make anyone a member. And you can give them as many voting rights as you want. What we actually did was say there's going to be community investors and they only have voting rights over their property. They don't have voting rights over how the co-op is managed on a day-to-day basis. So we actually restricted their rights. But in the process of defining them, we made them members with the $1,000 exemption. So you can now be a worker co-op and say you do something with solar, and there's a lot of people who support you and want to support you. Instead of doing a very expensive tax, a stock offering or something like that, you can just go to those members and say, as long as you don't invest any more than $1,000, you'll be covered under this exemption as one of our members. You'll get voting rights over your property, but not voting rights over how the worker co-op is run. So, if we have time, there's a whole workshop about it, but that's a potential new thing. So I think I want to go to some of the things that we highlighted before, or open it up to questions at this point, rather than go through more details unless people feel otherwise. Yeah, Lee.
Minimum wage, how's that apply?
So there's a really weird situation where potentially you could be an employee for one purpose and not an employee for another purpose. Like each statute, they say what an employee is for the purposes of that statute. But often in the law, they say an employee is someone employed by an employer. It's literally what it says. Not very helpful. So you have to, what the courts do is they look at what was the intention behind the law. So to come back to our workers' comp example, the intention was to keep people from working long hours and getting injured. So it's actually against the intention to consider those people employees if that actually pays some premium pay is more likely to do that. So I think that's a really strong argument. I would not want to have to go into a court and say, because we're a worker co-op, we can pay less than minimum wage, because I think the intention of the law was to keep people from being exploited that way. So I think there can be situations like civil rights laws, I think those would apply equally to a worker cooperative member. And I certainly wouldn't try to get out of unemployment. Minimum wage. Now there is one reason why workers' comp. Okay. So fortunately, under California law, for a lot of the co-ops that would want to exempt themselves, there's already a law that allows that, because usually those are smaller co-ops. And there is a law, and it doesn't have anything to do with worker co-ops, it says that if all your workers are on your board of directors and the officers, then you can exempt yourself from workers' comp. So it's really meant for closely held corporations. So a lot of worker co-ops have already used that. Now there's a danger to doing that, because workers' comp actually has some benefits to it, including protection for the corporation. And if you just exempt yourselves and you don't get any other kind of insurance for yourself, you're going to leave all your workers at risk. So what most co-ops do that is they exempt themselves under that law, and then they get private disability insurance and health insurance, which actually is better for them as individual workers than workers' comp is. So it is possible to do. It doesn't really have to do anything with the new statute. There was a pre-existing law about that. But if you're going to do that, definitely get your workers covered under something else, and realize that you're leaving yourself open to some lawsuits that you wouldn't have been open to if you stayed under workers' comp. Because the deal with workers' comp is if I'm an employee and I get injured, even if it was a horrendous situation, all I can sue my employer for is my lost wages, actually 2/3 of my lost wages. Whereas even if they caused this accident was horrifying, I still am limited to workers' comp. That's actually a huge protection for employers. So you're giving that up if you exempt yourself from workers' comp, so there's that danger.
Can you still apply for workers' comp even if you meet that exemption?
Yeah, it's an exemption where you opt out, but if you don't opt out, you can't get workers' comp. So you can be a small company and realize, actually, workers' comp is a good deal for us, let's go ahead and do that. It'll make it harder later on if you do try to exempt yourself out, because it'll say you chose your way into the system.
Why is it so much more expensive to cover officers under workers' comp?
It's a crazy rule, and to me, it makes no sense. I think their thinking is, just to explain to you what that is when you have an officer, I think it's 37,500 now, or it might even be up to 40,000.
It's like 45.
It's 45? Okay. They assume that your officer is making $45,000 a year, and you have to pay workers' comp on them as though they're making $45,000 a year, even if your co-op is only paying them $20,000. So it's based on an idea they have that an officer must be really important, and so they must make a lot of money. So you should talk to your own particular attorney about it, but some co-ops I know, the way that we get around that is we make people officers who are never on payroll. Maybe someone's girlfriend, boyfriend. If they get $0 per hour, you don't have to pay them $40,000 because they're not on payroll at all. If you pay them at all, you have to pay them as though they make $40,000. So they get people to be their officers who are never going to be on payroll, just people that can get their signatures when they need to get them. So, a little tricky thing.
It's gotta be zero.
It's gotta be zero, yeah. Other questions, or otherwise I'll try to get back to some of these things. Yeah.
So you use the investor provision, so you talked about that there are voting rights associated with it. So, and was that in order to be able to get around securities laws, or what's the reason for giving voting rights to community investors?
Well, actually, we thought that the community investors should be protected. We didn't want them putting in money and maybe losing it. I mean, what if you had a foundation who was trying to start up a co-op and they put a lot of money into it, and the founders after a while, they just said, wow, let's just sell all the equipment and keep it ourselves. Then foundations probably wouldn't give to worker co-ops anymore. We actually think it's really good if people are from community investors and they put money in, that they actually get protection over their property rights.
So how does that work in terms of decision making? Then they vote just on decisions around?
Yeah, decisions about wrapping up the business, major sales of assets, demutualization, those kind of things. So they have votes over their property rights, but not votes over the rest of the governance of the business.
Is that, can I ask one thought?
Sure.
Is that veto power, or is it one vote?
It is veto power, yeah. And they vote as one class.
Good.
Yes. So there's, yeah, go ahead.
I guess, so I'm just like, I'm
And
curious
please
if,
jump in anytime.
like, say I'm a very small business, say a partnership, and I'm reaching scale at a point where I'm like, sorry, maybe I need to hire some people. What should I be thinking about in terms of like the benefit that all of this could like offer if I wanted to kind of like go that route?
Okay. I mean, there's the whole benefit of being an entity in the first place. It doesn't necessarily mean you want to be a worker co-op. The way I tend to explain it to the new people we hire to our bakeries is this. If we didn't form an entity and we ran out of raisins and I went over to get raisins in my truck and I ran someone over, not only would I be responsible, but everyone who's considered a partner would be personally responsible. You could be on the other side of the world at this time, and if I didn't own anything, because I just totaled my truck, and you had a truck and you had a house, they could go after you for everything they own. So that's why people don't normally go into businesses without having some kind of legal entity, whether an LLC or a co-op. Then it's just a question of, well, now we've decided that's a dangerous way to go into a business. We want a legal entity. Which kind of entity do we want to be? Worker co-ops have a lot of advantages to them. LLCs have a lot of advantages to them. But technically, if what you want to be is a worker co-op and call yourself a worker co-op in California, the only way to do that is to form under the cooperative statute. You can't be an LLC and call yourself a cooperative. It's actually illegal. So maybe that's important to you, maybe that's not important to you. Other co-ops will probably still recognize you as a co-op if you're democratically operated, but publicly you won't be able to say it. So that's the kind of thing you have to go through that assessment, like what's important to us? Is employment law really key to us, that we make sure that we're not considered employees? LLC is probably more safe to go that way. So you just have to go through that assessment with someone who's an attorney who knows. In terms of finding an attorney who knows, there are people in the room. One of the nice things is it doesn't really matter if you're in LA or if you're in Reno. It doesn't matter if you're in California. Any attorney can basically do work with you over the phone. So it's better to have one who knows than it has to have a local. But if there happens to be an attorney you know and you're comfortable with in your area, there are these resources. There's a whole website you guys put together called cooplaw.org. It's a great education. I've been happy sometimes to just work with an attorney from another area, for them to do the work and for me to consult with them. I love to get other attorneys to know this area of law. There is an attorney in San Diego who does know worker cooperative law. Her name's Andrea. Blanking on her last name right now. Carter, thank you. There's an attorney, Lois, who started the Eco Village in LA. Lois Arkin. So she knows more consumer housing cooperative law than she does. She's actually getting more enthusiastic about worker cooperatives after writing them off for a little while. So, but you can work with attorneys from other areas to like mentor someone who might be in your local area, but you don't really need to have to be local attorneys. But the thing is that before this law was passed, and when I was getting practicing, even though there wasn't co-op law, you went to an attorney and the first thing they tried to do was talk you out of being a co-op.